This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be.
Before I deliver my introduction to this episode, I want to acknowledge my co-creator and inspiration for what you are about to hear today. Her name is Mel Ching, and she is amazing. Director of Community Engagement for What School Could Be and producer-host of our YouTube live series, The Big Think. Mel and I have been co-creating on projects for almost 4 years. Mel, thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you are a committed education change agent ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. Okay, listeners, if you navigate to whatschoolcouldbe.org, you will find in the nav bar the words, the Innovation Playlist. What is this? The Innovation Playlist is a powerful change model based on small steps that elevate learning and life outcomes. It brings your community together to build consensus on your North Star. It trusts teachers to lead the way, build on successes, draw on best practices, and do what you take joy in, challenging your students in creative, distinctive ways that prepare them for life. One of the playlists is called Real World Challenges. What is this playlist? Imagine an educational landscape where students are not merely recipients of knowledge, but passionate investigators delving into the depths of authentic, engaging, and intricate questions, problems, and challenges. When you incorporate real-world challenges into your curriculum, students are empowered to actively engage with real-world complexities, become critical thinkers, problem solvers, and innovators. These students don't just absorb information, they apply their learning in impactful ways and have the opportunity to make a tangible difference in the world around them, whether at an individual, community, or organizational level. In this episode, we hear segments from previous conversations that featured guests who live and breathe the concept of real-world challenges. There are 5 segments in this episode, and I will provide a short introduction to each one. So if you're ready, I'm ready. And if you have insights or questions, email me at mltsinhawaii@gmail.com, which is my podcast contact. So what is gold standard project-based learning, especially in the context of real-world learning? In this segment, Ali Wong, at the time a national faculty member for PBL Works, tackles this question head-on. The question I asked her was the following. Ali, a few days ago, I got an announcement in my inbox from PBL World, which is an event in June of 2024 put on by PBL Works. The description in the email talked about deepening educators' understanding of, and I quote, gold standard project-based learning. The subtext here is that there is gold standard project-based learning and project-based learning that is below gold standard and perhaps not grounded in deeper learning. So what is this gold standard, and how will this June 2024 conference work to elevate the standards of project-based educators who will attend?
Gold standard project-based learning is when a project has all of the 7 design elements. They are a challenging problem or question, sustained inquiry, authenticity, critique, reflection. And the idea is that when we have all of those different design elements, when projects are really authentic to students' lives, when there's connections to the real world, when students are grappling with real problems, not just problems that a teacher made up in the classroom,
Mm,
that are challenging for them, that show students we trust them to become critical thinkers. There's a difference in that type of PBL.
mm,
Sometimes we think of PBL as just being hands-on activities,
mhm,
which hands-on activities are great, but they're just not necessarily a project in terms of the way we think of projects in project-based learning.
mm,
In project-based learning, we think of the project as being the way that students learn, the method through which students learn, not just a hands-on activity. And so I think that that's a key difference, that students are solving real problems, that they're authentic to their own lives, that they have voice and choice within their project and what they're doing and how they're learning versus just maybe doing something to either demonstrate their learning or just doing something that's hands-on.
mm. So, a couple of follow-up questions. Like, what is the actual kind of gold standard process for discovering the authenticity in the project? Like, how does the teacher and the student or the students, the learners, working together figure out how to make whatever the project is that they want to work on authentic, real world, and connected? What is that process that you go through? And I know this is like all of your work encapsulated practically in one question, but how does that work?
There's more than one process because every teacher works, in different ways and all students are different. So there's definitely more than one process. But I think it starts with teachers knowing their students well,
Mm,
knowing what they're interested in, knowing what they're curious about, knowing what might be challenging for them. So that's where it starts, is with teachers knowing their students well.
right.
And then from there, if a teacher is designing a driving question for a project or a theme for a project, that teacher will think about, what are my students interested in? What are they curious about? Where's the crossover with the subject that I'm teaching or the standards I need to cover this year? And then that can become a project. And then the last piece of authenticity is that it's connected to student interests and it's also connected to something greater in the world. So a job that students might choose to do when they finish college or a job related to the content material. How can you really make this project something that's connected? Maybe it's in service of someone else or a group of people. Maybe it's solving a problem that they're having at their own school on their own level. But how can you really connect it to something that is a true need?
Mm,
Another thing that I did as a teacher when I was researching, I was really interested in collaborative design.
mm,
So, not only how do I know who my students are and connect their interests to my content material as a teacher, but how can I actually collaboratively design a project with students?
mm,
And so that was a process I developed over the course of my years teaching at High Tech High, where I began my year by asking students, what are you curious about the world? And we used their questions to generate our driving question and our project themes. And we actually would co-design that project together based on student interests, the questions that they had, and the content that we were covering that year.
wow, that's awesome. So the second follow-up question actually moves us a little bit further along the project timeline. And, I made a documentary 3 years ago called The Innovation Playlist. And it basically told the story of 5 public schools in my home state of Hawaii that were doing some really innovative work in education. And there is this dramatic moment, Ali, in the film where a teacher on the island of Kauai is talking about project-based learning, and she's sort of pounding her hand in her fist, or her fist in her hand, and she says, "I'm trying to get across to the students that this is not just a project, this is a mission." And so we're kind of back to that mission idea. So is there a moment in gold standard PBL where the project itself starts to take on mission quality, if you will? And does that happen all the time, or is that just sort of something that you aspire to, where you really believe in what you're doing?
It's definitely something to aspire to. right? I think part of our job as teachers is to help students see themselves as activists, as fighters for social justice. And a lot of projects, when we give students ownership and when we give them the ability to lead the direction of the project, we see that kind of spark in them take over and they begin to care or show empathy or, really see themselves as having the power to create change through their project. So it's definitely something to aspire to all the time.
And so I know this would kind of put you on the spot, but my listeners are always feeding back to me that they love specific examples. So is there an example in your recent memory of a project that you saw unfold that really kind of reached that gold standard? And if yes, what was that project about?
There's so many projects that I've seen that can reach that gold standard. I'm going to share one, not that I did as a teacher, just because I've spent a while at PBL Works and as a school leader, but I visited a school in December
Hmm.
and they were having an exhibition of student learning. And this was a fifth grade project. And their project was in conjunction with the Humane Society
Hmm.
here in San Diego.
Hmm.
And students worked to create campaigns to help get cats and dogs adopted. And so they did some persuasive writing, and then they built either a dog house or a cat condo
Hmm.
for the animals that need to be adopted. And so that incorporated a lot of the math standards that they were learning for fifth grade. And then they hosted and planned and held their own pet adoption day. So they had all the animals come to the park near the school, and everyone who adopted a cat or a dog that day was able to also take home for free either the dog house or the cat condo that had been made by our students.
Wow. Wow, Ellie. Wow, I'm blown away by this. This is like such an amazing example. Goodness, like goosebumps over here. Wow. I'm just thinking of the multiplicity of, I guess, interdisciplinary learning that was going on during that project, right? That's what was going on? Just so many different elements to it.
Yeah, I really loved seeing at the exhibition how deeply the students cared about their mission to get these cats and dogs adopted. They
Yeah.
had written about it, they had gotten to experience meeting these animals. They were super passionate about the designs that they created. They were very creative for their cat condos and for their dog houses. And so just seeing that passion for adoption versus buying pets sparked in those kids was really powerful.
Real world challenges, youth agency, authentic learning, rethinking curriculum. What does this all mean to educators and even the lay public? In this segment, Raya Bidshari dives deep into the meaning of all this jargon, but she also challenges us to think about rethinking curriculum from the ground up. Raya, by the way, is the founder of the School for Humanity, which I first learned about in a PBS series titled A Brief History of the Future. So, Raya, the School of Humanity is featured in the final episode of a PBS documentary series titled A Brief History of the Future. And there are two moments during this segment I want to ask you about. So first, you were shown as the teacher convening a class on what appears to be day one. And the first thing you do with your young learners is ask a question. You ask, why are we learning this and why is it important? And I confess, Raya, not once in my years in school, and that was a lot of years, at any level did I ever hear a teacher begin this way. So, at both a conceptual and practical level, why begin this way?
Oh, we start all of our lessons that way. We have a rule. It's like in our template for our lesson outlines is we start with why are we learning this? Or sometimes why are we doing this if it's a
Yeah,
more of an admin focused lesson. And I mean, it's because we owe learners an explanation of why we're learning this. And there are so many concepts that have applications and importance and that we never actually allow learners to make that connection with.
yeah.
And it also forces us as educators to take a step back and say, how can I show learners the relevance of this? And then it almost forces you to then design the entire lesson from that application perspective to be able to then make that connection to how they're going to use it and why it matters.
Mm. So I don't want to put you on the hot seat, right, or put you in an uncomfortable space, but it feels to me like it's almost a moral imperative, going back to Sagan, that we do this with students, that we ask that question in the beginning. It feels, and I'm speaking from my 66-year-old self that's gotten a little cranky lately with how slow education changes. But sometimes I wonder, it's like, it's almost immoral to ask learners to sit down and just receive without knowing why they're doing it. I wonder how you feel about that.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's a step before that where we need to even answer that question,
Mm,
which is when we form and when we set curriculum standards.
yeah,
And is at a national level, at a global level, at a school level, those initial learning outcomes that we set as our curriculum.
yeah,
I think as a society, it's long overdue that we go back to the beginning and start from scratch and ask ourselves,
yeah.
what are the most in demand skills of the future today? What are the needs of human progress? What do these young minds need to flourish in life? And then, with those questions in mind, what are the necessary knowledge, skills, and mindsets that we want to set curriculum standards or outcomes around?
Mm,
And I believe if we asked ourselves those questions today and started over, we would land in a very different place, even in many subject areas that are core literacies,
yeah.
than we have most traditional school curriculum. And I think it's outrageous that most national level schooling systems have failed to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. It is. It's outrageous. Okay. So, Raya, a bit later in the same PBS series segment, the host, Ari Wallach, sits down with some of your students and asks them a pretty stunning question, which is, what tomorrows do you want to see? And again, I was never, ever asked that question in my schooling. So I wonder if you can channel your students, Raya, and give us examples of what tomorrows these kids want to see and how the School of Humanity helps them begin the journey.
Ooh, it's an excellent question. And, one of the quotes that we share with all of our learners during orientation is the Buckminster Fuller quote that we are the architects of the future, not its victims.
Yeah.
There's a similar quote from His Highness the Ruler of Dubai where he says the future belongs to those who can imagine it, design it, and execute it. It's
Mm,
not something you await, it's something you create. And we work really hard to try to inspire our learners to take that mindset. And so every term our learners learn through real world challenges. So I do get an opportunity to see how they would envision creating a different future for humanity. And some of the concerns or trends or visions that commonly come up, one is around this harmony with nature,
mm,
designing with nature, biomimicry. They are very, very concerned about artificial intelligence and similar exponentially advancing technologies. I'm constantly inspired and surprised at the same time with how when AI started emerging, immediately they started thinking about the ethics and societal implications and
mm,
what does this mean for our world. And so I think a world where we maintain our humanity in the age of AI is definitely one. Many of our learners still have that cosmic perspective and want to see futures where we explore the universe. And last but definitely not least, this idea of equity and equality, how we ensure all human beings can, have a path to self-actualization, regardless of where they're born. And I think that our learners have a special ability to pursue this because we are a global high school
mm.
and we have full-time learners in over 30 countries across 6 continents. And because of our financial aid program, we have learners from all kinds of income brackets, including those from backgrounds that otherwise would never have been able to access this kind of education.
Mm,
And we can see that that gives them just a different perspective,
mm.
especially if from a privileged background.
Wow. Raya, would one of the tomorrows that your young learners would like to see, to design, to construct, is one of those tomorrows a time when the assumptions of adults that kids should sit and listen ends? You know what I'm asking? It's like that sense of, I don't know what it is. In all these years that I've been involved in education, it seems to be a particular struggle that when folks become adults, they stop thinking that kids have any contributions to make. And the kids, on the other hand, are kind of calling BS on that idea increasingly these days and saying, we already have experiences under our belts that help us to see what the tomorrow is that we want. You know what I'm asking? It's like, do you get that from your learners, that they feel like that and they want to live in a world where their voice really matters from a very early age?
Absolutely. And I think that as adults, we also need to really reframe how we think about this. One of the learners that I've had the privilege of working with, mentoring with, his name is Adam Al Rafe, based in Dubai. He constantly advocates for this idea of ability, not age, and helping the world see what someone can contribute regardless of their age and taking age out of the equation.
Yeah.
The other thing I've been advocating for is this idea of youth boards and having
Mm,
youth representation on boards. There are many companies that are now starting to do this in interesting ways. And last but not least, we started earlier in this conversation talking about that naivety and the delusion. Another way to reframe that is younger people generally tend to be more bold. They tend to be willing to take risks that our world sometimes needs.
yeah.
And they tend to have more of that creativity and imagination. And these are strengths that, they have in those formative years. And we ought to tap into that more as a society.
Mm.
And yeah, so to summarize, I couldn't agree more. And I think there's just such a incredible asset that we have in our world with young people that's untapped at the moment.
Jeff Holte is the co-founder of Liger Leadership Academy in Cambodia. The stories he told in my episode with him fused theory with practice and ranged across opportunity-based learning that involved everything from marine biology research to paleontology to publishing books on Cambodian economics. Have a listen to what Jeff has to say about all this and be inspired. So, quote, by engaging in real issues, students focus on big picture systems thinking and create a final product or action that causes change or serves a meaningful purpose. This process helps each student develop individually and communally as creators and innovators. It ensures deep and authentic learning, engaging students in critical thinking, problem solving, and decision making in contexts that are relevant to them, end quote. So these are awesome words, Jeff. And I wonder if you could bring the point home by describing a specific example or two or three, meaning actual projects Liger students dug into that clearly illustrate these words.
I'll give you one example about publications or writing. So the students at Liger in Cambodia, in particular, the school in Cambodia, now more recently in New Zealand, they're working on these things, but just publications. So in Cambodia, books are still a very big thing because everybody doesn't have computers and so on. So our students have published a number of books, including just recently, The Economy of Cambodia, Volume 2.
Whoa.
So we
Wow.
have them think about change and think about making a difference, but no joke, like go for it. Go for something big. You can do that. And so a number of years ago, they wrote the original Economy of Cambodia. no book, there's hardly any books in Cambodia about the economy of Cambodia. And they were 12-year-olds mostly, and they traveled around the country, interviewed people, talked to different people in the government and so on about the economy, the different sectors of the economy, energy and farming, agriculture is a very big deal. And they literally did everything. So they conceptualized the book and they wrote the book. They went and interviewed people. They didn't know anything about desktop publishing. So it's like, okay, well, how are you going to publish this book? It's like, so then they learned. They got an expert mentor from the US someplace who met with them online and taught them how to actually use software, how to write it all down. They did all the photography. They did all the interviewing like adults about the economy.
Wow.
And you would think that 12-year-old Cambodian kids who know nothing about, like many kids in Cambodia don't know anything very much about the rest of the things that are going on in Cambodia, let alone how the whole economy works. So anyway, and they did everything. And then we said to them, and this is with almost all of the publications that they've done, is that, well, who's going to read this book? You're not just going to turn it in for a grade. Who's going to read it? Well, other kids should read it in the country so they could understand how our country works. And they go, great, how are you going to do that? Well, we need to publish a book. You have a book and you've done desktop publishing. We need thousands of books to give to schools. And we said, well, how are you going to do that? How are we going to get the money for that? It's like, well, we better do some fundraising. And so they literally had to have the ownership of thinking about what the topic is, the book or the economy. They had to do all the work. They had to do the fundraising. They had to do the distribution. It's like, well, how are we going to distribute the book to all the schools in the country? That's what they wanted to do. It's like, well, we can't drive around to every school. It's like, yeah, well, let's ask the Minister of Education in the country if he'd be excited about this and maybe he could do it. So the Ministry of Education, they like, yeah, it's just amazing. And then we've done that with The Wildlife of Cambodia, which is a book that's, you can find it on Amazon now or whatever. And it is the wildlife, and it's all hand painted wildlife of all the animals in Cambodia. Our kids had never done watercolor painting. So a person came in to do watercolor painting with our students. This wasn't one of our own. So that's a whole other thing about who's a teacher and who's a learner. But so we just incorporate everybody to help them accomplish this goal. So they learned, they did all the watercoloring. Some of the watercolors were so good, they sold a lot of the watercolors for fundraising to print more books. So that's gone to every school in Cambodia. So there are kids all over the country actually reading their book. And they also did fundraising for that. And and now they just did they finished a book on the geography of Cambodia.
Wow.
And then they did the economy volume 2, which in Cambodia, they get a lot of press for. I mean, to do that. But it's funny because not only does that first economy book, I've been places with students there. I was at the airport one time in Phnom Penh, and we went to the bookstore, and I said, hey, we were going to robotics somewhere with some of the students. And I go, if you go to that bookstore, I bet you're going to find your book there. And they went and they found their economy book at the bookstore at the airport.
God. Oh, my.
And then the guy who worked at the bookstore said, hey, I know that book. I used that in my college course. I'm an economy major. And they're like, really? So my point is that these things that make a difference, when they're given responsibility for doing something big, they really do it. Like they can do amazing, amazing things. And then they're responsible. So you talk about engagement. Like, first of all, some of these books, they have a lot of writing in them. I remember the geography book about Cambodia, like kids are like, geez, this is really hard writing. But I never really was super excited about writing in middle school and high school, but they're writing for very real audiences. Like it's no joke. So they have to, and they have mentors, they have our facilitators, our teachers who help them and so on. But it's like, they're not getting a grade. They don't care about that. They have to become a better writer. They want to become a better writer. They're engaged and they are responsible to publish an entire book that potentially hundreds of thousands of people are going to read. And I think that literally changes your perspective on everything.
Awesome example. So, and perfect segue. I'm going to read a quote by Dominic Sharp from your Liger webpage. Here's the quote. Liger Leadership Academy not only encourages and develops entrepreneurial thinkers, but is in itself entrepreneurial as we constantly look to improve or create new ways to achieve our goal, end quote. So my question is about entrepreneurship in education, which you've been talking about here for the last couple of minutes. There are tons and tons of schools that focus on developing entrepreneurship mindsets, which is great, and skills in kids. But Dominic's assertion that Liger has in and of itself an entrepreneurial mindset really caught my attention, Jeff. So what does this mean in practical terms for the school, for the team, for the students?
I think one thing is that we are not about just literal entrepreneurship, as you have really mentioned. It's more about the idea of entrepreneurial thinking. And one of the things that we really focus on is the idea of what are the skills and attitudes and what do we really need to work on for their future work, in the next 20 or 30 years. What are some things we can give them? So attributes and some skills and knowledge. And so I know a lot of people are working on those kinds of things. So we do that. In addition to that, I know Dom was talking about the idea too that we're always trying to improve. In other words, there's not one simple model, one type of learning other than project-based learning. And obviously we're a very experiential learning. I think of as opportunity-based learning. So what that really means to us is that a lot of our learning experiences come from opportunity. So we're always changing. In other words, we don't know what projects are going to happen next year. So we take opportunities that arise. And I'll give you an example. We had a group of students working on an island off the coast of Cambodia a number of years ago now, and they were helping an organization actually with some medical things and kind of helping translate and doing some other things for like a nonprofit organization and so on, and then doing some marine research. And on that trip, somebody said, hey, you guys want to do some more marine biology? There's a group on an island off the coast of Cambodia that is doing research, and maybe they would be interested in having you guys come and join them. So anyway, like our Liger Marine Research Team was formed out of an opportunity from somewhere else. And we said, oh, well, let's go investigate. So now literally we have a partnership with Marine Conservation Cambodia, an organization. It's been going for years. So our students have become the first certified scuba divers, and they literally do marine research with experts from around the world. So they're studying seahorses, and they're building artificial reefs, and they're scuba divers, and the students at Liger are presented at international conferences all over. So, but my point is that idea of us growing and changing is based on opportunities that exist within the community. So our entire curriculum is based on, well, what are the needs of the community? And then we listen and change and adapt and then take on something. Another just real quick example is that we had a group of students that were creating a website about the interesting geology about Cambodia, which doesn't exist really. And so they were talking to the Minister of Mines in Cambodia, interviewing him about some of this.
Wow.
And he said to my student, I wasn't even there. Some adult was there with them, I think. I don't know who it was. But the students came back to me and said, because I was education director, and they're like, the Minister of Mines told us that somebody discovered dinosaur footprints up in northern Cambodia.
Wow.
And I said, really? It's like, what do you all think about that? It's like, well, we should go check that out because there's never been a dinosaur discovered in Cambodia ever. And so we took a trip up there and then anyway, established an entire project trying to investigate. And so they had to interview paleontologists all the world. So you're talking about learning content areas through real sort of opportunity-based experiences, but that's super powerful. So they got to know more about paleontology and about research and about original research and about documentation and writing and scientific method and so many other things based on various opportunities that arise. That's really how it works. And it's pretty exciting. And it's also really interesting for teachers as well.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my 2 podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, this is Greg Bear, along with Ryan Rudzeski, and we're the co-hosts of the Remaking Tomorrow podcast,
a series of conversations about the future of learning.
We encourage you to find and listen to the Remaking Tomorrow podcast wherever you listen to your pods.
You'll find over 60 past episodes that you can browse and listen to whenever you'd like.
Remaking Tomorrow is powered by Remake Learning. Learn more at remakelearning.org.
Ever made a tough decision and looked back and wondered, what did I miss? What happened? What could I have done differently? I'm Peter Stiepelman, the host of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership podcast. After nearly 30 years in education, I know that real leadership isn't about perfection. It's about learning from mistakes, embracing growth, and lifting each other up. Join me each week as I talk with leaders who reflect on their challenges, their relationships, and the lessons that made them stronger. Because imperfection, that's where the real learning happens. Listen now on your favorite podcast platform.
In this segment, Rebecca Parks, a principal at an elementary school in southern Missouri, tells the story of transforming a dirt patch into an archaeological dig site, bringing wonder and inquiry to third, fourth, and fifth graders. Her students' joy, autonomy, and measurable academic growth remind us that real-world challenges are not just for older students. Have a listen and be inspired when you hear what actually happened in the rain and snow as students went on a big dig. And yes, this was done in partnership with a hero community member named Gary.
So Lens is housed in one of our wings of the junior high building. So the majority of the building consists of 8th and 9th grade students, but there was one long hallway, if you will, that could be sectioned off for Lens for, at the time, our 3rd and 4th graders. And that wing at one point had also been the district staff daycare and very small early childhood center. So we had a very small area outside of that wing that was once a playground for our early childhood students. That playground was taken down, and it really was just an area of dirt.
Okay.
And this was something that Gary came up with. I think that the guy just sees something and he envisions these amazing things. So he's like, this is perfect for a dig pit. Let's use this. And I am going to plant these things, trilobites, and students can come out and I will take them on an archaeological dig. And so that is what happened. We had our families, we asked them to donate little hand garden shovels, and kids wear gardening gloves and bring your muck boots and your jackets. And students were so excited for these digs. They would go out one class at a time, and they just had this area of dirt and they would start digging. But every time they found something, Gary always buried these hidden treasures from his shop. And so students would find these things. They would yell out in excitement and scream. Gary would bring everyone over. He would set up this parameter so that they could really study what is the size and the shape and what do you think this could be? Lots of inferencing that was happening. And the students just loved it. And then they would go off and they would continue their digs, and he would say how many things to be looking for, and that's what they would do. And then there would be something that was massive and amazing, some bone of some sort. And once again, they would all come over and they would measure and they would talk about the coloring of it. They would talk about the structure and they would make inferences on what they thought that it could be. It was absolutely amazing.
Wow. This is so incredible. And I just have to say in this moment, Rebecca, like Gary Staub, if you're listening to this right now, if you're listening to this episode, you rock, brother, because this is a brilliant, brilliant idea. The elements of discovery and inquiry in this are unbelievable. And it just gives me goosebumps. And it's really important, I think, that you go, listeners, to the Lens site, and we'll link it in the show notes, so that you can actually see some of the imagery. But that was really nicely described, Rebecca. Well done. Okay, so describe for us what happened when Tom Vander Ark of Getting Smart visited Lens in the first year. Like, that must have been a big and meaningful moment for you and your staff and everybody who was involved in this.
Oh my goodness. For me, I felt I was starstruck. I think I said that in some of my notes to you. Tom was coming out to experience real world learning at the secondary level.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill Nicely, our superintendent, got a hold of me and said, if there's time, I'd like to run Tom by. And so if you could have a time where we could show him around. And so we did that. We had students who were like student ambassadors, and they welcomed Tom and some of his staff into the building. They introduced him to Lens, told him what it was all about. He got to experience an archaeological dig with Gary. I'm pretty sure that it was even raining that day, or maybe even snowing. Something, the weather elements were not great, but it made it all the more fun. But the students got to tell him all about what they were doing, and the excitement from them is what was amazing. Because, oftentimes I've always felt like I've wanted to prep students so much if they are going to do a presentation, whether it's for the Board of Education or having guests come in. But there was no prepping needed. They just took their excitement and their learning experiences and ran with it. And I think Tom was pretty excited too.
Wow, that's amazing. The students know when moments are authentic, and clearly they knew that moment was authentic. That's just, I would love to have been a fly on the wall when that happened. And I can imagine Tom, that one of them handing a fossil to Tom and Tom going, wow, what is this? So that's wild. Okay. So number 5, you shared with me that reading growth assessed by your district was, and this is your word, crazy. Like, what conclusions did you and your staff come to with regard to reading mastery tied to place-based and project-based learning at that elementary level?
Absolutely. Well, we saw a ton of growth over the course of these years. I think the time that it really stood out is when we did change our selection process. So we went from where the parents submitted a form to say that they were interested in their children going, to us moving to an opt-out approach. So we actually put all of our incoming third graders, and then also if we had space for fourth, and we had expanded to fifth as well, we put all of them in this lottery. And then the other thing that we did is we mirrored our demographics across the district. So we had our ratios were very similar, or our percentages were very similar of our various demographics, whether it's free and reduced lunch, students on IEPs, reading needs, whatnot. And then even with that, with having the same similar demographics, then our growth scores, we look at quadrants of high performance or high achievement and high growth. That's what you're wanting, right? And that's what we continue to see, was not only just high achievement, but also high growth. And so students who maybe were already on the average to above average readers that came to Lens, then over the course of their year, then not only were they still high achievers, but they had also had high growth.
Wow.
And so that was really rewarding for us.
Oh, I can
and
imagine.
then as I shared earlier, we're still held accountable by state assessments.
Yeah.
And those state assessments came back very strong. But not only did they come back strong in ELA, but they also did in math. But the kicker was science. And our fifth grade science assessment is pretty hard. It's challenging. It really is a reading test and an application test. And those scores have consistently been very strong at Lens, just giving us more evidence that project-based learning with real-world experiences for elementary students makes a world of difference.
Sean Duffy, a teacher in Michigan, is a walking, talking work of educator art. Funny, insightful, relentless in the pursuit of real-world challenges and purpose-driven learning. His work at Project Next, a program in his high school, shows the breadth of what's possible in a public school setting. Political campaign simulations, storytelling through mixed media on global injustices, and the 23andMe project, where students imagine their 23-year-old selves based on economics, career, and climate data. Fasten your seatbelts, listeners. This one is going to get crazy. So tell us about your Project Next team, which you called extraordinary. What makes them so, Sean? What binds you all together? What is your North Star that you collectively agree to?
Well, and it's similar between the Project Next team and the rest of my school. I'm very fortunate to have just the whole directory of everyone who works in my building is phenomenal. But one of the things that's really part of the conversation that unites the 11 of us in the Project Next team is continued and recursive curiosity. We love to play around with ideas. We bat around ideas of how to break down how we've traditionally taught our subjects in ways that we co-create meaning with each other. Every idea is on the table when the 11 of us are collaborating. And, we all have a foot in traditional education as well. We don't all teach all day in Project Next, but the times when we do have hours where we're teaching as teams at our grade level teams and as a collective, our culture as Project Next teachers is let's throw all the ideas out there. All ideas are good until proven that they could be better. So we have that culture and that kind of shared trust among us that it is tough to launch integrative project-based learning across math, science, social studies, design thinking, English. But also at the end of the day, that curiosity overcomes the difficulty barrier.
Got it. So number 3, tell our listeners about Campaign 44, exclamation point. How did you immerse your learners in the complexities of a congressional campaign?
So in each of our levels of Project Next, we number them off. There's PN 9, 10, 11, 12 for our grade levels. I teach in PN 11, where we combine environmental science, civics, economics, and English. And one of the projects we tried out, my 2 co-teachers, Matt and Eric, the 3 of us kind of do everything for PN 11. We toyed around with ideas of new projects last year. And one of them was, as we were looking at politics and we were looking at our own personal social media, we wondered how the beasts of political identity, campaigns, propaganda have come about so fiercely in 2023, 2024. And so Campaign 44 is one of our project arcs in PN 11. It lasts about 4 weeks. And the students work in teams to either choose to work in the light or work in the dark as they develop lobbying outfits, as they develop election campaigns for a few choice hypothetical election seats for the House of Representatives or the Senate or the presidency. And in the project, the students interact with people who work in media, who work in lobbying institutions like the Brookings Institution. They talk to the people out there who cook up these campaigns, who cook up media messaging, and they bring it home to us in Project Next through a project in which they create an immersive campaign experience with, campaign media across social media and physical media in our school, to the point to where last year we had students outside of Project Next that were liking and resharing hashtag campaign 44 or hashtag whatever a student's brand had been for their campaign on their own social media to kind of get in the game. And by gamifying political identity and political campaigning, the students inductively figured out what are those rhetorical and psychological strategies that empower political campaigns. And they got really into it and were very creative. And a couple of them got really intense with it. But isn't that the real world of politics?
Wow. Sean, it happens almost in every episode. There is this moment where I want to go back to school. That just happened just now. I want to go back to school. Wow. I would have thrived in something like that. And instead, no regrets. I don't want to get into regrets. But, imagine me sleepwalking my way through, U.S. history. Oh, okay. Number 4. What is wordless storytelling, and in what ways is it an example of what some folks call challenge-based learning?
Yeah, this was a project that I was part of when it first started. Now that Project Next has expanded so much, I'm up at the 11th grade. This project lives among my friends down at the Project Next 9 level for freshmen. And so this project has had a lot of iterations and evolutions over time because we've been doing it now. This will be year 6 for wordless storytelling. But essentially, this project was a combined design thinking, English, and world history project. And the question posed to the students was, if the people who've experienced genocide and injustices worldwide could have a chance to share their story, but knowing that they wouldn't be able to have the words to fully encapsulate their human experience, how can you use mixed media and the arts to tell their stories wordlessly?
Wow.
So as an empathy arc, wordless storytelling is basically, as students select a global conflict, area of injustice, past or ongoing, things like the Armenian genocide and what's going on in China with the Uyghur population, they're able to select a story that they feel deserves to be elevated. And through that empathy experience, they have to develop a word-free, human, immersive work of art or installation that brings people into understanding the story. We've had works that come out of wordless storytelling. For instance, we had a student several years ago do an altered book where they turned an open book into a chessboard, and the pieces on the chessboard were different artifacts and remnants of the Armenian genocide, for example.
Wow.
And it was wordless, but in their artist statement, the student said, for some people, the history of the Armenian genocide is just a game. So what would it be like to live through what other people feel is just a game or something to be tokenized, like a chess piece? So, this is a really engaging and impactful story arc where we give the kids a lot of free rein, and they have to work collaboratively to figure out how to honor stories that aren't their own. And at 14 and 15, that is an incredible challenge to develop that empathy. But through that, the core content, through the English and through the world history, stays with them because they see the human side of the stories by doing.
Wow, that's just a brilliant concept, Sean. Wow. Okay, I have to collect myself here. I'm getting goosebumps. I'm getting sent into orbit here. Okay, number 5. What is 23andMe, and in what ways does it broaden the horizons of young learners?
Well, as we're recording this, my students are in the midst of the 23andMe project right now.
Cool.
We posed to them as part of economics, environmental science, and English at PN11, who is the 23-year-old you? Realistically, not necessarily the I dream of winning the lottery, having $7 billion and a house in Malibu dream of 23, but knowing you and reflecting on you, the student, you, the person, you as the dreamer, who likely are you at 23? What career story are you in the midst of when you're 23? What likely will be your living circumstances, knowing yourself, or through the project, doing some introspection on yourself? What will the story be as climate is changing around you and your reaction to the world around you? So in 23andMe, we tasked our juniors to spend a couple of weeks exploring their possible career paths, but not just in that aspirational way of saying, oh, I want to be a lawyer one day. Well, cool. But on the way to being a lawyer in your 30s, what does 23 realistically look like? What will be your likely job at that position? How will you budget for that? How will you select housing? How will you handle insurance? Do you have a concept of how gutsy 23-year-old you will be with deductible? So we give them space to kind of open-endedly explore their 23-year-old selves. Just to be kitschy, we called the project 23andMe, like the DNA testing company.
Right.
But it gives space at the end of our economic semester of PN11 for them to just see possibility, but also get grounded in reality, and maybe for the first time start to picture the real selves of their future in a couple years, and not just the aspirational in many years from now.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with leading edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by Education Change Agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter @WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn @Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.